I want to thank everybody for joining us again this morning. We got some really good topics we're going to touch on. And I know Sean's been dealing with it a lot recently, dealing with inspections, but we also want to touch a little bit on the deeds and the benefit of pulling the deed or deed of trust and putting it into your loops when you're doing a listing. And the other thing I want to mention, I was on a great seminar the other day and with the Maryland Realtors Association. And by the way, we have one of their attorneys that are going to do our next Tales from the Field on February 23rd. And we're going to be talking about advertising. And he's going to give a great presentation on advertising. But anyhow, one of the things that came up is that one of the biggest complaints that agents are getting now or being presented to the agents is that they are renewing their license and not getting all their CE credits done. And they're actually, even though everything's electronic nowadays, they're sending out audit notices and they're double checking, and they're finding that it was, I think, like 40% of their complaints about agents from DLLR was that they were renewing their license and didn't have all their CE credits. So beware of that, okay? So with that, we're going to get started. And Sean, I'll let you go ahead and talk a little bit about the pooling the deed and deed of trust and the benefit and why we're asking that be part of their loops.
Okay. All right. Yeah, just some of you, this will be a refresher course because we've talked about it before, and hopefully most of you have that link. In Maryland, it's a little more challenging. In Pennsylvania or Delaware, and we're working on that. But in Maryland, if you're not already using it, make a note to familiarize yourself with the MD Land Rec, MDLandREC.net site. It will allow you to sign up for a free account. And we have gone ahead actually a year or so ago and put as a required item when you're taking a listing, a copy of the deed. Not so much the deed of trust, which is just another name for a mortgage, but the deed, the most recent deed will show you who's currently entitled. It'll show you if somebody was removed, and that's who you should be dealing with as your clients. Believe it or not, we've had a few instances where it doesn't get discovered until your listing is done, you're under contract, and the title company about 2 weeks prior to closing has run their title search and comes back to you as the listing agent and said, where's John? Where's Paul? Where's whoever the other party on the deed is that's not signed the contract of sale? Sometimes it's that they've passed away and we're just going to need a death certificate. Sometimes it is that, unfortunately, and we've come across this, there's a missing heir. And those are typically the least fun because it might be that somebody, unbeknownst to other members of the family, added a person to the deed and then they pass away and that person is left as the remainder. So then we have to find that person. And that's happened, and the agent has come to me and said, well, the seller said, do we really have to find them? Yes, we do. So we have to have all parties in title who are not deceased be there at it's easy to add them back on the contract, but you have to have them for the conveyance. So that's an important thing. And that's the why. I like to explain the why. Mostly, I think everybody gets it now. We've been doing it long enough that you understand the why. It's also handy if a lot of times we run into, especially in the city with the older properties and the $36 a year ground rents, where there's a ground rent unbeknownst to the seller. They may have bought, and may have been then that nobody could figure out who owned it, and they have forgotten over time that there was the 3-year escrow done or whatever was done at the time that was appropriate at settlement, but nonetheless the ground rent still exists in land records. So that also, when you go to pull a copy of the deed, if you see the deed called an assignment, that'll be your clue before you start reading the body of the document that that's going to involve a ground rent, which you can also check that on the SDAT website to see if there is one registered. If everybody registered them, life would be great. I think the ladies at Liberty would agree. Unreleased mortgages and unrecorded ground rents are some of the biggest banes in the industry. So if we can just get ahead of it by pulling a copy of the deed when you go to list the property, then you know who you're dealing with. It's not so much that we're looking for fraud, which can and has happened, but we're looking for unknown people added to a deed. Hopefully nobody's added their minor child to the deed, or a perhaps developmentally challenged person. I've had that happen where they added that person to a deed and they can't convey, then you have to go through a different thing. But the long and short of it is, if you can pull a copy of the deed, it puts you on good firm ground as you take that listing. You know you're dealing with the parties involved, or you're getting the explanation of somebody has passed, or something was done very recently in a divorce and hasn't hit the land records yet. So we can kind of head it off at the pass and get busy with that in the beginning. So that's the why behind the ask on that one. And we don't get challenged on that one too much. I think all of you have done it enough. You know why we're asking, but just wanted to review that. It's important, and we still sometimes see them come through without that deed. And we just like to get that in the beginning, so it gets you on good, strong ground.
We have Lisa from Liberty Title that has something to say. Go ahead, Lisa.
This is more for the, good morning, everybody. This is more for the newer agents, and just an example of something that I'm dealing with right now, where the investor bought a lot, subdivided it, sold one of the lots to the buyers, and the title company that handled it transferred both lots. So, and if he pulled the deed right then and there, they would have known, and my buyer of the other lot is going to build on it, and he's already put $7,000 into engineering. So it's really important to pull the deed. I love that you're encouraging that.
Yeah,
That's all.
It's a good point, Lisa. And I'll tell you, years ago, I sold a property in the Catonsville area of all places, and it was a much older property built in the early 1900s. There were actually 3 different lots, 3 different deeds, and I didn't pull up the deed. And prior to that, I was doing that kind of stuff, and I thought, I'll let this one slide. But what happened is we went under contract, and the title company that was researching and found lots 1 and lots 2 transferred over back in like the 1950s or something like that. But lot 3 never transferred over and was still in the original owner's name. And they had already, the newer owners, the ones I was selling for, had built a garage on it. And what we had to go through was tremendous, because the title company that handled that particular settlement was no longer in business, and the owner of that title company was in jail. So it needed a challenge, but it was quite a lesson to learn.
And the other, just one more thing that I don't think a lot of people think about, these people that bought that house, they got a mortgage. Well, the mortgage encumbered both lots 1 and 2. So that title company is having to get a partial release as to our lot. So it's a lot of, it can be a lot of work, and it could be a lawsuit. I mean, the contract is really a fraudulent contract because the seller didn't own it when So anyway, thank you for listening.
Yes, you're quite welcome. So again, the importance of the deed. We're going to get into another topic right now that's probably going to involve a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion. We're going to talk about the new inspection addendums, the as is, and talk about that. And just so everybody understands, when Maryland changed the contract of sale, they did remove a couple articles within the contract, one of which is the pest inspection, so that 2% that people used to know was there, that was guaranteed, so to speak, by contract, that if they found any issues dealing with wood destroying insects, that the seller was obligated to 2% of the contract sales price to remediate and make any repairs. That's no longer there. It's part of the inspection. But what's more important to understand is that the contract of sale itself is an as-is contract unless the buyer selects to do an inspection. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the inspection addendum, how it's really changed, and the things that are included with it. And we'll talk about the as-is addendum, the new as-is additional addendum, and things of that nature. And Sean, if you want to talk a little bit about the inspection addendum, and I can share it on the screen if you want me to, Sean.
Okay, and I'd first like to say, honestly, since these forms changed, I've probably had 5 battles where our agents are involved with somebody, mostly having to do with the pest inspection. And first, I would just like to say, for those of you on here, and I hope it like reverberates throughout the company, thank you for listening to my whiny voice from October until now about please get on these seminars, please listen, please pay attention, listen to this about the form. This is going to bite people. And it is, but really not our people. The ones that I've had to deal with are our agents knowing their stuff, you guys knowing your stuff, being well prepared, knowing how to represent your client's interests. But the other side, I just finished myself one with a delightful, wonderful agent who her whole transaction was in a binder. Every detail was down to the wire. Every receipt was picture perfect, 30 years in the business. And when I said to her, hey, before I order a pest, does the seller have a warranty in place? I always like to ask before I get a new company who's going to require treatment because they've already had treatment. And she said, what are you talking about? The pest is in the contract. The sellers will have to do whatever. And I was like, this was just like 3 weeks ago. So it wasn't like it was October 2nd. And she was a delightful person, but she had no clue what I was talking about. She laughed and said, I guess you can tell this is my first contract since October 1st. Thanks for telling me that. Because she would have let me lead her down the path of, there were carpenter bees and their policy covered it. But had I been not trying to help her and advise her, she could have been led down a path and misrepresented her seller, which is so dangerous, because what if she realized midway through that she was wrong? So we've had some situations where, and again, I've not had one person from this company come to me and say, I dug myself a hole, I can't get out of it, I forgot about the change. It's been the other side. So I thank everybody for listening, for putting up with it, for attending, participating, because we are some of the best prepared people for these changes. And so what we're encountering is a lot of it has to do with the pest inspection. And then I'll go into the timeframes. But the pest inspection is still, it's remembering. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but that's what's happening. The outside is not realizing still that that pest inspection is no longer part of the contract. We had one agent who was dealing with her listing where the buyer's agent adamantly tried to make the lender make it a condition of the loan and said, you will have the sellers treat. And it was like, no, they don't want to. And the lender would not make it a condition of the loan. And we knew it because it was a conventional 20% down loan. And so our seller, with our agent's help, just said respectfully, no, we've done other things. You missed your mark. We're not doing it. They tried everything. The agent got belligerent, got nasty, got begging, got pleadful, and the seller wasn't having it. And it got down to, we asked for a copy of the appraisal to see any predications, which would have said if the lender made that a condition of the loan, and it was not there. And finally, the title attorney, who had a relationship with that buyer's agent, spoke to them and said, you made a mistake. See you guys at settlement. So that one was one of the more extreme, because the agent went from submissive to belligerent to pleadful. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. You want to be fair to people, but we can't spend our days educating the other agents who haven't paid attention to this. So that one, you guys by and large know your stuff. I'm preaching to the choir here. You're paying attention, you know the changes. The other one that seems to be revisiting, which is what we suspected might happen, is the time frames on that. And I still find myself, I have to go back and reread the new way that the PIN is negotiated. For the last few contracts I've written since October 1st, I've got to reread it and make sure that I'm not missing something, that I'm not falling back on memory versus how many days do I have. You know, it became so rote to all of us to know, okay, well, if we use our addendum, we have this many days and this many days beyond getting the report. I still doubt myself if I'm using the MAR one and have to go back and read it and be aware. And then the other thing that I'm seeing visit is, and again, not so much from our crowd, we kind of know what we're doing here. It's the lack of response from when one party gives an answer back on that PIN, no response from the party receiving it as a counter means acceptance. So if we had one where a broker got into such an argument with one of our agents, and when I called him, unbeknownst to me, somebody explained he had had a medical crisis and he wasn't himself, but he got downright belligerent, accusatory, nasty, threatening, because he forgot to ask his sellers to put it in writing. When the buyer asked for, the buyer would have been happy, our buyer would have been happy with $3,000. When it went kind of bad, they countered back with like 7,200, and the seller's agent verbally talked to our agent, but presented nothing back in writing. And we took the position that the buyers then were going to get $7,200 in closing. I called to explain that to the broker. I got the same tongue lashing as our agent did, which did not fly well. And our buyers did get $7,200. And it's not punitive. That's the thing. When the reason for the contract of sale is so when you have these debates, you can go back to the words and interpret what was supposed to happen. So it's so important to pay attention to the words. We all operate oftentimes in a spirit of cooperation with our counterparts out there, and that's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing, and we rely on that. But these changes, in my opinion, were so monumental that when you run into something that is that your client is adamant about not performing to, and if you've missed your mark on those words, there's little you can do. So it's important to pay attention to the change in the words and not be complacent over what we've known for years. And again, I'm not talking to anybody here who's brought that problem to me. It's coming from the outside in. These are the things that we didn't want to have happen for you guys, that we have to negotiate back out of a hole and try to make it work. That's not happening here. You guys are doing great business. You're paying attention, but we're getting it back, and sometimes rather forcefully and nastily from the other people who didn't pay attention to the changes. So that's it. It's just, we're into this enough time now that the changes are being implemented, but I'm surprised still that we are in the beginning of January and we're still having to explain to the other agents what the meaning of the changes in the new contract are.
Just keep in mind, again, when it comes to the PIN and you're going back and forth negotiating, it is to be in writing. That's why they have all those different time frames in there. You've got the initial response from the buyer. The seller is supposed to respond on that document in writing, and then the buyer is supposed to respond back in writing. Everything's in writing, or else it is not binding. It's not part of the contract. So it has to be in writing, and they did that purposefully so that, it can be, again, completely understood. And as Sean's saying, be careful how you write things. Don't try and be an attorney. Make it simple and clear that the other side understands exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and if you're in doubt, if you try to write something or you want to, and it's really necessary, if it's complicated, just go to your manager, George, myself, or if it's not that complicated, grab a colleague in the workroom with you and say, read this addendum. What do you think this means? What would, if you saw this, what do you think would be the result of these words? Just so you can make sure your words are getting across the point that you want to.
And I really like it a lot when you guys call and you read something to us, and sometimes I'll ask where, I'll go into your loop and I'll see it if it's there, and I'll go through it with you. And it's good for all of us, because I can't speak for Sean, but I know I learn by talking to you guys as well. It's a two-way street. But seeing another set of eyes on it, and if I can understand it, or if I don't understand it, it's a good chance that the other side won't understand it. But I know John and Phyllis even called me late last night, and unfortunately I couldn't call them back until this morning. But we went over something dealing with the as-is addendum, and they reviewed it with me and their feelings about it, and we decided how to move forward with that. And that's what it's all about. That's what Sean and I are here for, and John or anybody else that's in our leadership team.
Jay Hull has a good question in the chat box.
Okay. How can we protect our seller clients who completed HOA addendum disclosure saying there was no HOA or fee when there was one? Where can we go to verify? Wow. Okay. Well, I guess, Sean, you want to tell, normally something like that is recorded in some way, but how would they, my big question is, how would they not know that they have a homeowners association? Go ahead, Sean.
Here, like my first gut feeling about that is, yes, you can kind of take the name of their neighborhood and you can go to that same thing in Maryland land records. You can look up not only by people's names, you can look it up by company or corporate names. You can search like for the name of their neighborhood that way and see if you see any loosely, you can see recorded documents. Wouldn't be for you to interpret, but it would be a starting point to, is there one? If I'm not sure, if somebody tells me no to a front foot or an HOA, the tool that I typically will use, sometimes I'll ask a title partner, but we also don't like to lean on them for questions where we're taking up their time with little or no benefit, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that like our partners here from Liberty wouldn't do it, but you can also, I'll go into Bright and I'll look at like the last 10 sales in that neighborhood. And if I have a doubt, I'll look in there to see what that listing agent put as far as was there a front foot assessment or an HOA. And if there was a recent sale, I'll even call one of either the listing or the buying agent or the title company who did it and ask. If I'm just not feeling that the seller is totally understanding. And there are times where maybe they've inherited an estate, or it was a husband and wife and one passed away and the other just didn't handle that for the family. So it could just be, it's not deceptive. People just don't understand what you're asking them, or they don't have any idea because they're dealing with an overwhelming situation where somebody's passed or lost and they don't know if there was a ground rent or an HOA. So I'll utilize Bright and go back and see if I can see like a pattern in that neighborhood if there was one. Because if it's in a neighborhood, I often think it's likely, unless it's over 31 years old, that you're going to have a front foot assessment. And it's not unlikely that you'd also have an HOA. So I use that tool to track it in Bright. Start there maybe.
Yeah, Sean, I do a lot of what you're talking about. When I do my market analysis, even though I try to stay back maybe a year, and I'll look at the other properties that have sold and look at if there's any information in there about HOAs, anything like that. And if it is, then I go back and question my seller.
Right.
I will tell you this, those of you that deal with the Baltimore metro area, there are at least 3 different communities in the Baltimore metro area that were built in the 1950s, 1950, 1951. Rogers Forge being one of them, Academy Heights, Loch Raven Village is another one. They may not have a mandatory HOA, they're voluntary, and people think they don't need to disclose anything, but each and every one of those communities have required covenants and restrictions that are recorded. And when I used to live in Academy Heights, we ran into problems with that because one of the requirements was there were slate roofs and you could not use anything but slate on those roofs. And when I was part of that community, I was on the board, and we found somebody had just bought a home. There were 2 situations. Somebody just bought a home, and we walked by this house, and there's all this asphalt shingle sitting out front on skids, and they were getting ready to replace the roof. And we approached the roofer and said, "You can't use that." And a dispute arose because it was never disclosed to them, the covenants and restrictions, and they're right there. They're on the Academy Heights website. Same way with Rogers Forge, has certain conditions like that. The height of the fence, the size, the type of fence, all those sheds, everything is it's requirements. Okay. Going a little bit further on the inspections addendum, I know some people hate When you get into part B, where the buyer has the absolute right to get out of the contract and they are not required to send you a copy of the inspection report, there are even some of our agents saying, I hate that. I hate it because they want to try and be able to negotiate. Understand that we're all on the same playing field. The listing agent has the same addendum. We have it. It's in there. That's what they put in there. The only way to get around that we know of, and we put back in, if you're buying as is, we put in the RE/MAX, the RMA as is addendum. So you still have the right to use that if you so desire. And it's a little bit more detailed, I guess, giving you a little bit more ammunition as to how you can get out of the contract and the right to do inspections and so forth. But it does give the buyer that right. It's in there, unless they go to the next section where they start negotiating. Okay. Any questions with that? And we already touched on the property inspections notice. That once again, any responses have to be in writing to go back and forth in order for it to be considered part of the contract. And basically, it's a counter. Okay. Let's see.
One
And
thing to go back real quick to Jay's question, the HOA is important, but the one that can be harmful is the front foot benefit, where if the seller doesn't disclose that, that can come back. And we've had one of those happen too, where it was a daughter and her parents who were in title. The parents were there basically as co-signers when she bought, and she didn't think or remember about a front foot assessment. They really didn't know because they didn't live in or operate the house. And there was, we're still not, thankfully it wasn't a long time left, but there was enough time left that it totaled up to just under $2,000, and there was no defense. There's no like on the disclosure disclaimer where the exemption for an estate, there's no exemption really for, well, an attorney could argue that if an estate's closed, who are they going to go after on a front foot assessment? But there's really no exemption on the front foot assessment. If it doesn't get disclosed, then the buyer can come back to the seller and the seller would be responsible for the balance remaining on it. So that one is pretty important to really dig around with folks, or to try and figure it out in land records, or to do the bright diligence. The HOA is going to upset people, but the front foot can fiscally harm somebody.
yeah, if they discover it prior to settlement, the buyer has the right to get out of the contract. If they
Right.
discover
Right.
it
Well,
during
in this case, the buyer didn't, or seller didn't disclose, didn't think about it, and title somehow missed it too, which I'm not sure how, but they did.
Okay.
Wasn't Liberty, was not Liberty.
Anybody have any questions so far? No? No? Let's see. Thank you. Okay, Jace, thanking you. I mean, that was our list of coverage. I mean, Sean, do you have anything else you want to go over?
No, I think it was just wanting to go back over that topic now that the forms have kind of settled in. Everybody's probably written a piece of business mostly since October when the contract changed. Hopefully you've not gotten into some of these confrontations with the other agents, but just, if you do, don't second guess yourself, come back, ask one of us, we'll read through it with you. Each situation is unique, depends how it was written. But at the end of the day, the words are what the words are. So we just have to help everybody understand that.
And the one thing I would say, be careful about the time frame that you put in there. And I know Sean touched on that at the very beginning, but think about it before you put it. Don't just arbitrarily put, oh, we'll do it in 7 days.
Right.
Can it be done in 7 days? Can it be done in 10 days? And the listing agent may try and negotiate that time down on behalf of their buyer, or their seller rather, but know that, can you complete that inspection? What if you're doing a septic well? Can it be done if you're putting 7 days in there? Can it be done in that time? And If you're adding them, make sure you add the appropriate additional addendums if it's needed, like septic, because there are certain conditions in the septic inspection addendum that if they disrupt ground or something like that, that somehow the people are protected. But make sure you look at your date, as with any date you put in your contract, even if you're putting, and this going off on another direction, but even if you put in your settlement date, I put settlement dates in there, and then I see the date of loan commitment is beyond the settlement date. I've seen that multiple times, but make sure you communicate with your lender, communicate with your inspector that those things can be done in that time frame. And if not, you need to expand it, because it's not a time frame for each. It's one time frame you're putting in there. You may have been able to put in a different time frame at one point for the radon, a different time frame for this. Now it's one time frame. So you may be able to get the inspection done in 10 days, but maybe the radon takes another 2 or 3 days. So you want to make it 13 days. Whatever it might be, and think in terms of holidays, like the Christmas holidays, any other holidays that fall within that time frame. You want to allow yourself that additional time frame to compensate for the holiday, the time that offices are closed and people aren't working.
That's so important. You're right, because if you get one that's loaded up where it's well, septic, water quality, yield, radon, termite, chimney, putting 7 days in there might be a problem, and that's where you have to remember and watch too. I used to be so used to, we would get them done sequentially, like you would start with the most expensive one, and kind of back them all in either one day or a couple of days, but try to get through them so you knew how bad one might be before you went to the next. And then I would wait and do the pest, because there was no time frame on that. When it was just in the contract, it was just prior to closing. Now you have to remember, you can't wait on that one. The least expensive inspection that we can potentially do could be the biggest problem, because you can get Pest Now to come out for $40, but if you missed your time mark, you may have just cost the buyer the right to ask for several $100s worth of treatment or repairs. So it's important, like you're saying, keep mindful of those time frames.
And Jay Hall just put something really, again, a very good comment, Jay, thank you. What if your client's or at least one of the clients are out of state? And digital signatures are great, but what if it's an older client that's out of state that doesn't know how to use some of these systems that you got to get documents to them, and it takes longer time period in order to get those documents signed? That all has to be taken into consideration when you're writing your offers.
And I'm not sure if Jay was referring any to this too, but I've just recently brought to thought another one that just came to mind. And I personally have had 2 of these in the past few months, where you have sellers who do not live in the state, and prepping them for the non-resident 8 to 8.25% tax on their proceeds, and prepping them for that time frame too, watching that, because you can't start that request to the comptroller's office until you're under contract. But once you're under contract, as fast as we move these days, they ask for 21 days prior to. Now, I had a friend who worked there, but she's been promoted, so we got no more favors to pull with their office, but because I was lucky, I got one done in 3 days. But that's a sensitive time frame too. When you have a seller who is out of state or bought under an LLC but formed their LLC out of the state of Maryland, they're going to be subject to that either 8% as an individual, or I think it's 8.25%, right, Liberty ladies? 8.25% if you're an LLC or a corporation. So get ready, prep your seller when you take the listing, and be ready to get that form and help them, tell them to start gathering all of the information on any capital improvements they've done, and be ready, because we're not accountants, but if you can give them advice and get them steered towards that. It's not our job to get it done, but I think it's another service to remind them, so that they're not dealing with that painful tens of thousands of dollars potentially taken from them at the time of settlement.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Sean, and Rachel and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but especially if you're out of state, if there is that taxes due, it is taken out of their net proceeds at settlement, and you want to prepare your client, your seller for that so that they know that could be happening.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, I saw Rachel moving her lips, but I think she was on mute. So still talking. I can't, either that or she's talking on the phone. I'm not sure which. There you go.
You would want to let,
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry. So I was saying, yes, it is taken out of the proceeds. I always prepare people for that, and the good agents prepare their sellers well in advance as well. But I always say, no matter what, call the comptroller. Even if you don't think you have some deductions, it's always worth exploring, because I have seen a lot of time they're not liable for the full 8%. So I would always, no matter what, if you're out of state, talk to the comptroller. And I don't have a friend there that does favors, but I have a guy that I ask a lot of questions. So if you guys ever have a question, I have a pre-written email that I send to out-of-state clients when agents ask for my opinion or help in that matter. I forward them that email with and kind of go over exemptions and how to still qualify, as your primary residence, all that fun stuff. So.
Great.
And again, as Sean often says, I know we're speaking to the choir here, but I mean, preaching to the choir, but we are educators and consultants more than anything. We're educating our clients about the contract, any contract they sell. We're educating them about the process of the transaction. We're keeping them informed so that they can make good decisions. We don't make those decisions for them. We give them the best information we can so that they can make good, strong decisions. And it's important that they understand every step of the way what's going to be expected of them, so that there are no surprises when they start getting the settlement. When they get the settlement, everybody should be smiling and happy. Should be. Okay?
Do you mind if I touch on one more thing about One was talking earlier about making sure you look up the property and who owns it. I do touch a lot of this. I see so many times agents, especially when it's in the state, are not using the personal representative to sign. So they're still using the owner's name that's deceased, but really it should be the estate. And that just happened recently. And, as title, we see someone's name on the contract and they match with SCAP. It's not until we're told that they're actually deceased that we're looking for those letters of the letters of administration and the personal representative. So very important to know who's actually on title.
Yeah, it's important that we know that information when there's LLCs involved and who has the right to sign on behalf of the LLC, that we need the documentation to show proof of that, that person actually has the legitimate right to sign that contract. And I always push it a little bit further when they sign the contracts. I'd like to have underneath what their position is, because to me, and I'm not an attorney, Rachel, but to me, if you just sign your name, you're signing as an individual. If you sign and it has that title, you're signing as that representative.
I love when agents do that. When I see sole member or managing member or authorized member, and then they follow up with a resolution, something like that. It's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Makes our job a lot easier.
That's what we're here for, to make it easy for you guys.
Not easy, but we know who's supposed to be signing a lot quicker.
Let's see. Okay, Sean nailed it again. God, Jay loves you, Sean. I can see that. Anybody have anything else? Sean? Anybody? John, you got any comments?
Yeah, just when we're wrapping up, I'll just give a little bit of an outline of the rest of the month that we're going to have on our classes, and a little bit of a forecast.
Go ahead and do that right now, because I think we're pretty much wrapped up.
Okay, great. First of all, good seeing everybody. Happy New Year and whatnot. If I sound nasally, that's because I maybe have COVID. I have had positives and negatives every other day in the past 2 weeks, so I don't believe anybody anymore. I feel pretty good though. But We have a little baby in the family now. I have a great grandchild. I can't go near her. And that's the pain. That's the pain. So I'll tell you all said hello. Anyway, coming up in January, next week, this time on Tuesday, Ryan Paquin from First Home Funding is going to come in, and he's going to give us some sort of a forecast and a look at what the mortgage industry is saying about next year, right? It's not going to be anything earth-shattering, I'm quite certain, right? We are in a period looking at our market to come where I believe all the signs are saying we hunker down, we get in touch with our people, we are sympathetic, we are talking to them, we encourage them that there is a silver lining at the end of this, but the silver lining is probably 6 months away. That's the reality of what we've got from every piece of information I'm getting from Riz Media and from Inman News and the intercircles of REMAX, John Cheplack, Darren Hardy. Everybody's a predictor nowadays. And if there's one consistency, it's to hunker down, get a hold of your people, do not lose faith in the business. We have seen cycles like this, and this one's going to be a shorter cycle than some of the more painful ones in the past. So keep your heart strong on that. Bright MLS is going to come in on the 24th of January for a live class on using Bright tools for social media outreach to your buyers and sellers. We're going to try to simulcast that by having it also being Zoomed, but I can't guarantee that. So that's the 24th. It's going to be in Ellicott City. And if it goes well and we can't simulcast it, George and I will get it out to Carroll County shortly thereafter for a live session. We want to push the live sessions, guys. I'm noticing that a number of you have really been attending some of the intra-office ones that have been going on, and my kudos to that. 23, 24 people together is a really tremendous number. I really want to take my hat off to the Carroll County people in particular for doing that fairly consistently. And then finally, on the 26th of the month, which is a Thursday, we should be getting a very good update on the progress with KV Core, which is going to be the new REMAX rollout, replacing Booge. And I believe they're getting closer and closer to a definitive rollout on that. So that's what we've got going in January. We'll have a new menu out in February. But keep your spirits up. Keep your spirits up. And keep in contact with your people. It's care calls now. That's all what it's about. It's all about care calls, right? Be the realtor who remembered them.
Yeah.
Because a lot of other realtors don't know what to say. You know what you say? Hello, how are you? That's what you say.
And
It's easy.
a little bit of shameless self-promotion. I'm really happy with the way that the mastermind meetings are going out here in Carroll County. And I do invite every time we have one, I don't care what operation you're out of, whether it's Fells Point, Ellicott City, Fulton, Westminster, Eldersburg, wherever you guys are from, you're all welcome to join, especially, Lisa and Rachel, you're all, and Terry, you guys are always welcome to them. Our next one is Monday, February 6th. I haven't found the speaker yet, but I'm working on it. I got an idea, but they're going very well. And those, I know we've got a lot of people that have signed up to go to the R4 convention. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody out there, and that starts the 27th of February.
That's a great networking event. Okay, by the way, next week I will have some statistics next week on year over year, because the MAR, by the 15th of the month, they generally get a reflection on the previous year. So I should have those ready for next Tuesday when Ryan is doing his presentation. So we'll see what we got. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.